Hello everyone, and welcome to Oztrack's video on conducting your risk assessment. The purpose of this video is to walk you through the steps you need to take to complete an assessment of your money laundering, terrorism financing, and proliferation financing risks. We refer to this as an MLTF risk assessment. To support you, we've published risk assessment quick guides, which include guidance and sector-specific risk factors to help you practically apply the steps involved in developing your risk assessment for your business. We recommend that you have this quick guide on hand to help you reflect as you go. If you don't have it with you, you can find it on the Education About Reforms page on the Austrac website or in the description of this video. The information presented in this video is current at the time of recording, general in nature, and does not constitute legal advice. You may consider obtaining your own independent professional advice, which can take into account your business's specific and individual needs. This content is at an introductory level, and more detailed information can be accessed on the Austrac website. We'll use examples and explanations throughout the video to clarify various terms that you will see used under the AML-CTF regime. These have been simplified for introductory purposes and do not comprehensively define each term or scenario. The purpose of this video is to help you understand how to develop a risk assessment and how to apply it to your business. Specifically, after this video, you'll be able to understand the purpose of an MLTF risk assessment within the AML-CTF framework and understand and apply the steps involved in developing your risk assessment. You'll also understand how to apply a structured approach to identifying and assessing money laundering, terrorism financing, and proliferation financing risks in your business, and gain clarity on how to identify and assess risks that are specific to your business or sector. Just as a reminder, when we refer to risks, we mean the risks of money laundering, terrorism financing, and proliferation financing, or MLTF risks for short. We'll work through some scenarios and examples to assist you with your understanding of risk assessments and risk ratings. Please note that all scenarios and examples in this video are intended for demonstration purposes only and are not intended to represent actual risk assessments and ratings related to your business. To begin, I'll provide a brief overview of risk assessments. Your risk assessment is the foundation of your AML-CTF program. Risk assessments involve identifying and assessing the risks your business may reasonably face against the likelihood of them occurring and the impact if they do. You must conduct a risk assessment before you provide a designated service or before you plan to provide a new designated service. This is because your risk assessment will identify and assess money laundering, terrorism financing, and proliferation financing risks, and inform the types of controls, processes, and procedures needed to mitigate and manage these risks. The steps you take to conduct your risk assessment must be appropriate to the nature, size, and complexity of your business. This means that you can develop or adjust your approach to suit your business while also meeting your obligations. We'll go over these steps soon. If you don't manage your risks, there could be serious consequences for not only your business, but also the wider community. Criminals take advantage of weak systems to move illicit funds, which enables serious crime and contributes to exploitation and financial loss in the community. The impact goes far beyond your business. It affects public safety and trust in the financial system. Moving on now to your risk assessment obligations. Firstly, you need to identify and assess the MLTF risks you may reasonably face when you provide designated services. As part of this, we expect you to consider a number of risk categories when identifying potential risks. You can pause here now to think about what these risk categories are. You can also find them in your quick guide. You need to consider risks that arise through 4 risk categories. These are your kinds of designated services, including the level of risk for every designated service you provide, your customer types, including the risk each customer and customer type pose to your business, your delivery channels, so this is the way you deliver your designated services, and the countries you deal with, noting that different countries or regions can carry different risks. You must also assess any planned designated services, customer types, delivery channels, or countries that could increase your MLTF risk. We expect you to consider information communicated by AUSTRAC, which identifies or assesses risks related to your designated services. This includes AUSTRAC risk products, such as national risk assessments, sector guidance, and any direct feedback provided to you by AUSTRAC. You also need to tailor the steps you take to conduct your risk assessment. As we mentioned earlier, these steps must be appropriate to the nature, size, and complexity of your business. And finally, we expect you to also document your risk assessment in a way that's easy to understand and use by your governing body, your senior manager or managers, your AML/CTF compliance officer, and all staff whose work is relevant to the risks raised in your risk assessment. Now that we've covered what a risk assessment involves and your obligations, we'll go into the steps you need to take to conduct your risk assessment. As you can see on the slide, there are 3 key parts that make up a risk assessment. This process is also in your quick guide. The first step is to identify your inherent MLTF risks and when the risks may occur. In this step, you'll need to identify the areas in your business that could be exposed to risk and focus on any existing weaknesses. As we discussed earlier, you must consider what risks your business could reasonably face from the designated services you provide, your customer types, your delivery channels, and the countries you deal with. The second step is to assess your inherent MLTF risks to understand the scale of each one. This could include assessing the likelihood of each risk occurring within a given time frame against the impact on your business if that risk was to occur. You can do this by using a risk matrix, which we'll demonstrate later in the video. And finally, after rating each risk factor, you may evaluate and prioritize how to address them based upon their risk. From here, you can then work out how to mitigate and manage these risks. We'll go into more detail on each of these steps soon. After you've identified and assessed your inherent risks, any residual risks can be assessed. Your inherent risks are those you may reasonably face before applying any AML/CTF policies and measures for risk mitigation and management, while your residual risks are those that remain after AML/CTF policies have been implemented. The first step in conducting a risk assessment is to identify your business's inherent risks. This is where you need to understand the types of risks your business could reasonably face and any vulnerabilities that currently exist. To do this, you should consider and document each risk category along with their MLTF risks. Again, these risk categories are the kinds of designated services you offer, the customer types you deal with, the delivery channels you use, and the countries you deal with. For example, you might consider that third-party platforms as a delivery channel can pose a risk, as it might be difficult for you to verify your customers face-to-face, which can then increase the chances of fraud. In identifying your inherent risks, you should also consider data on how your customers are onboarded or use your services, our information on common MLTF typologies and indicators related to your industry, and how your business could be vulnerable to MLTF exploitation. When identifying your MLTF risks as a starting point, we expect you to consider whether your designated services involve high-value transactions, including with physical currency and virtual assets, or legal structures and arrangements that help your customers stay anonymous or disguise the source of their wealth or funds. This is because these are common MLTF risk factors that are relevant to a wide range of designated services. You should also consider new or emerging technologies which could expose your business to sudden risks. Pause here and have a think about some risk factors in your sector which relate to the risk categories we mentioned earlier. Feel free to use your quick guide to assist with this. We've gathered some examples of risk factors for each of the risk categories. It's important to note that these examples are not intended to include all potential risk factors that could be linked to these risk categories. For designated services, you can find some sector-specific examples in your risk assessment quick guide under the services heading. For customer types, some examples include politically exposed persons, as they can be potential targets for corruption and bribery, non-residents of Australia, as it may be harder to monitor or verify their identification or understand their source of funds and source of wealth, individuals with criminal histories, including directors or beneficial owners, as they can be involved in criminal activity and use criminal proceeds to fund a transaction. Complex legal structures, as these can potentially obscure ownership and source of funds. And third parties, as if a customer uses an agent or representative to act on their behalf, it can be more difficult to verify a customer's identity or understand their source of funds. For delivery channels, some examples include remote or online channels without staff assistance, which can carry significant MLTF risks due to the lack of in-person contact before providing a service. Remote staff assisted service delivery, such as telephone or email, which can have challenges identifying suspicious or inconsistent behaviour, and lack of encryption for document transfer. And through intermediaries or third parties, as it can be more challenging to know who the customer is and verify source of funds and other matters. For countries, it's very important that as part of step 1, identifying inherent risk, you list all countries that your business deals in or with when you provide designated services, including Australia. As part of this, we expect you to include countries you or your customer deal in or with when you provide designated services, countries your customer is a resident of if they're an individual, and for body corporates and legal arrangement, countries your customer is registered or incorporated in arrangement. You will then need to assess the risk for each country. The core guidance on the AUSTRAC website provides useful information on how you should approach this. Please remember that this is not an exhaustive list, as your risks will vary depending on the nature, size, and complexity of your business. For the purposes of this next activity, we'll be demonstrating some of the information you could include in your risk assessment. To do this, we'll be focusing on 2 specific risk factors: domestic politically exposed persons, or PEPs, and a telephone delivery channel. In saying this, we again encourage you to think about the risk factors you might see in your business when it comes to your designated services, your customer types, your delivery channels, and the countries you deal with. When conducting a risk assessment, the second step is to assess your inherent risks. To assess your MLTF risks, we expect you to consider the scale of vulnerability of each risk factor to exploitation. You'll need to consider how each risk category you've identified could be exploited to hide the identity or source of wealth or source of funds of a person, is easy to access and use, allows value to be raised, moved, or stored, and is known to be exploited by criminals or is a common channel for money laundering, terrorism financing, or proliferation financing. Your approach to assessing inherent risks should consider the complexity of your business. This will ensure that your risk assessment appropriately reflects the nature of your business's MLTF risks. The matrix on this slide is an example for a medium complexity business. For these businesses, inherent risk can be assessed by looking at the likelihood of the risk occurring within a given time frame and without any controls or mitigation strategies in place, and the impact, damage, or consequence if the risks occur. For low complexity businesses, assessing impact alone may be enough. The likelihood is assessed by assigning a rating of not likely, likely, and very likely, while the impact is assessed by assigning a rating of high, medium, or low. From here, you can use a risk matrix, like the one to the right of your screen, to help you get a risk rating by multiplying the likelihood by the impact of the risk. For example, a likelihood of very likely and an impact of major would give us a risk rating of high. You could then use a risk response table, like the one to the left of your screen, to score each of the risks you've identified and assessed. Let's have a go at this ourselves in a couple of scenarios. Imagine you're a compliance officer assessing the inherent risk of domestic PEPs. You've assessed that the likelihood is likely and the impact is moderate. Using the risk matrix on the slide, pause here to think about what the correct inherent risk rating for domestic PEPs would be. You can also find this risk matrix in your quick guide. So the correct answer here is B, medium. This is because likely and moderate intersect at medium in the risk matrix. Let's try one more example. You're now assessing the inherent risk of the telephone as a delivery channel. As business is only conducted over the telephone with existing customers, you've assessed that the likelihood of this risk occurring is not likely and the impact is minor. Again, pause here to think about what the correct inherent risk rating for the telephone as a delivery channel would be. So the correct answer here is A, low, given that not likely and minor intersect at low in the risk matrix. Just remember that the scenarios we've worked through today are examples only and are not intended to represent actual risk ratings in these scenarios. You need to determine the appropriate risk rating based on your business. You'll need to document your assessment of each inherent risk factor. As an example, you could collate your findings into a table, similar to what we've done here, and then include the table into your own risk assessment. After you've identified and assessed your inherent risks, you may evaluate and prioritise them. To do this, you need to decide which risks require the most attention after you assess your inherent risks and how you'll respond to each one based on its risk rating. The risk ratings will either be low, medium, or high. For example, if you've evaluated any of your risk factors as high, you need to prioritise them as you'll need extra controls to mitigate and manage these risks. Examples of extra controls might include limiting the channels and services you provide to high-risk customers and increasing the monitoring of your customers' transactions and behaviours. If you can't appropriately mitigate or manage the higher risk, you need to consider whether to continue providing designated services to the customer. You can then manage lower risk factors with simpler controls. Prioritising your risks will help you allocate your resources efficiently and help you ensure that your controls are proportionate and targeted to your risks. After you've conducted your risk assessment, there are still a few extra steps you need to take. First, you need to develop your AML/CTF policies. This includes your systems and controls to mitigate and manage your risks. Once developed, you'll also need to maintain your AML/CTF policies. We went through some examples of controls a moment ago, but let's see if we can think of some more. Consider this scenario. You offer online services to customers you've never met in person. What controls could you put in place to reduce your risk and ensure your customers are who they say they are? Pause here to think about this. If you're stuck, there are some example controls listed in your quick guide that might be useful. Some examples of controls that you could implement include customer due diligence procedures, advanced document and identity verification tools and procedures, for example, liveness identification tests, and monitoring of devices or email and phone numbers. Outside of this scenario, some other examples of controls include setting limits or restrictions on business from high-risk countries, transaction monitoring to look for suspicious activity or red flags, and setting limits for transaction types, for example, cash, deposits, and transfers. Finally, you must regularly review and update your risk assessment. Your review must be appropriate to the nature, size, and complexity of your business. It must also be done at least once every 3 years and also in other circumstances, including where there's been a significant change. Pause here to think about what circumstances trigger your need to review your risk assessment. Some circumstances where you'll need to review and update your risk assessment include where there's been a significant change within your business's control. So, for example, if you're offering new designated services, or if you have new customer types, or if you're providing designated services through a new channel, or providing designated services dealing with a new country. Where there's been a significant change not within your business's control. So, for example, if there's been an update to AML/CTF legislation or rules, or changes in the MLTF risk of a country you deal with. If you receive communications from AUSTRAC relevant to your business or sector that identifies or assesses the risks that are associated with you providing designated services, so that could be through newsletters or newly published AUSTRAC typologies or guidance or any direct communication, and if an independent evaluation report has adverse findings about your risk assessment. So, for example, if it identifies any gaps. This isn't an exhaustive list of what counts as a significant change or other circumstance. It's your responsibility to determine when your business will require a review. After reviewing, you must then update your risk assessment if you identify any issues in your review. Your risk assessment must be updated as soon as reasonably practicable after your review is completed. For significant changes within your business's control, this update and review must take place before the significant change occurs. For more information about your obligations in reviewing and updating your risk assessment, you can refer to the guidance on the AUSTRAC website. Now that we've gone through the end-to-end process of conducting a risk assessment, let's quickly review the steps we've covered. Remember, first, you need to identify your business's MLTF risks and when the risks may occur. Second, you need to assess your inherent MLTF risks by understanding the likelihood of these weaknesses being exploited and the potential impact for your business. And finally, you may evaluate your risks and prioritize them based on their risk rating. This allows you to then work out how to mitigate and manage these risks. After you conduct your risk assessment, you can then move to mitigating and managing your risks by developing and maintaining AML-CTF policies. You also need to ensure that you regularly review and update your risk assessment so it remains accurate and up to date. Now we know there's a lot to take in when it comes to risk assessments. We don't expect you to remember it all. This is where the core guidance and education products will support you. But to summarise, when conducting your risk assessment, you need to complete it before providing any designated services, tailor your risk assessment to the nature, size, and complexity of your business, identify your inherent risks before assessing your residual risks, consider new or developing technology that could expose your business to risk, and consider information AUSTRAC communicates that identifies or assesses relevant risks. Now that you've been introduced to how to develop and conduct your risk assessment, take some time to consider how you can start applying these concepts to your own business. As mentioned earlier, your risk assessment is the foundation of your AML-CTF program. It helps you identify and assess the MLTF risks your business faces and ensures your controls are targeted and effective. When your risk assessment is well designed and clearly documented, it allows you to tailor your controls so they're proportionate to the nature, size, and complexity of your business. There are a range of resources available on the AUSTRAC website to support you, including reform guidance, industry-specific guidance, and national risk assessments. We'll also be publishing further risk products to support you with understanding and conducting risk assessments. These will include posters to support your staff to identify red flags, video animations, and e-learning. We encourage you to start preparing now. Taking early action and understanding your obligations will set your business up for success and support the protection of Australia's financial system and wider community. To stay up to date with new guidance and risk resources as they're released, we encourage you to subscribe for reform updates on the AUSTRAC website. That brings us to the end of this video. The AUSTRAC YouTube channel has other videos available. If you're a new reporting entity, and if you haven't already, we recommend watching the AML-CTF Essentials series. This is a series of 4 webinars designed to introduce you to AUSTRAC, Australia's AML-CTF regime, and provide the information you need to help you meet your new obligations. For further education products, including the risk assessment quick guides referenced throughout this video, please visit the AUSTRAC website. Thank you for viewing the Conducting a Risk Assessment video.